What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Processing Blue, where we process blue for you. He's Mike Kaye. I'm Alex Zietlow, and we cover the Carolina Panthers for the Charlotte Observer. Mike, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, Alex, we're going to talk about what we saw at rookie minicamp. We'll use the name Corey Thornton. Full pause. We'll have another conversation about what we expect from some of the players coming off injuries, including the offensive line depth. But, Alex, what should we start with today?
Let's start at rookie minicamp, that first thing you said, since you were there for 2 days on Friday and Saturday, and I was there just on Saturday. And I understand there's only so much we can glean from a few days at rookie minicamp. Players aren't wearing pads. There's only so much physical contact that you can see. There's not, at least what we saw, there's not a ton of offense versus defense live scrimmaging naturally. But the position groups, specifically the skill position groups, I think you can kind of learn a lot about, particularly the quarterbacks and receivers. And I will say, Chris Brazzell II made a pretty great first impression, I thought, at least on Saturday. You were there for both days. What was your first impression of him?
He razzle dazzled, man, with the name Chris Brazzell. He was pretty impressive. Those drills are meant to make him look good. He's fast, he's tall, he's a hands catcher. When you're playing against air, that's gonna make you look good no matter the scenario. But what I will say is it was abundantly clear that Haynes King and Brendan Lewis had never thrown to him before. There were balls everywhere. The accuracy was incredibly inconsistent. The timing wasn't down. And so there were several moments where Broussard, in at full speed, or at least almost full speed, had to contort his body and catch passes behind him, outreach for others, reach up for others. And while I think that is just going to happen at a rookie minicamp, I think he was so consistent about showing off his catching radius that it was just apparent that this kid, at the very least, knows what he's doing with the ball in the air. And I know a lot of people have made mention of his speed. He is a speedster. He's not an elite speedster, but I think the combination of using his size and speed is objectively intriguing if you were somebody who's watching the Panthers. I saw a lot of comparisons to Robbie Anderson. I don't see that at all. Robbie Anderson was a true speedster who had size. I see him more like DJ Chark as a guy who can high point the ball, can make ridiculous catches. He's a guy that uses his size and speed to his advantage as opposed to just being a fast guy with height. And I put that out on social media, got some feedback about it. But when I say DJ Chark, I'm saying like watch 2019 DJ Chark. Like they both are upright runners who have really good speed, good technique, can attack the ball with their hands. They are hands catchers. What I mean by that is they go up and get it with their hands first, like a diamond cutter, bang. You know what I mean? So they're not hauling it into their body. They can legitimately catch it with nothing around them. And so I think there's a difference between, again, size and speed mismatches and guys who actually use their size and speed properly.
I'm glad you brought up Robbie Anderson because that comparison, I believe it was first made by Dave Canales on Friday, or maybe someone brought it up to
He
Dave.
was asked about it because
Okay.
he was asked about it Friday. Because I guess folks on social media saw some clips and said, "Oh, he reminds me of Robbie Anderson."
Got it. And so then we asked Chris when we spoke to him on Saturday what he thought of that comparison, and he was polite about it, but I think it kind of threw him off guard a little bit because he was just like, "Oh yeah, no, he's a tall, relatively slender, fast guy, and he had 1,000-yard receiving year, right? Yeah, he's a baller." And so like, I'm not sure that he had ever heard of that comparison before, which I just thought was interesting. I like what you said about Haynes King as well. It did look like that Haynes had never thrown to someone who was that fast and who could get in and out of breaks that fast before, because particularly on the deep passes, particularly on those corner routes and those flag routes, like the ball was kind of coming in a little bit behind Chris. But if I'm a Panthers fan, that's a positive thing, you know? Like that was something that Panthers people were getting really excited over about Jimmy Horn last year. Oh my gosh, Jimmy Horn is outrunning routes or outrunning the ball when he's going out for routes. So I think that can only be a positive thing. Speaking of Haynes King, he's another guy that we got to see in person for the first time on Friday and Saturday. I personally thought that he looked poised for the most part, under control. Dave Canales said that through 2 days of minicamp, he only saw 2 pre-snap penalties from King, and that's mostly a credit to him and his age. He's 25 years old, which interestingly is older than 4-year NFL veteran Bryce Young. So I guess that's to be expected. Good leadership skills. Chris Brazzell told this fun anecdote about how after a rough first day on the field together, Haynes led a walkthrough in the parking lot because he was like, yo, we're not going to do this crap again, essentially. Outside of that, you couldn't really see too much of his athleticism shine through. His arm strength is pretty good, I thought. Any Haynes King first impressions that that stood out in those 2 days that you saw him?
He's kind of slender for a guy that a lot of people on the internet are trying to force him be the Taysom Hill of the Panthers. When I don't think people realize Taysom Hill was built like a weak side linebacker for the second half of his career. I texted you and Zach yesterday that putting Haynes King in the Taysom Hill category is like having Ben Affleck play Will Hunting in Good Will Hunting instead of Matt Damon and switching their roles. Like, yeah, he's a quality actor and he helped write the movie along with Matt Damon, but I don't think it's anywhere near the same movie with those two switching their roles.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of don't see it. We were standing next to him and he was not particularly physically imposing. They're the same height. They were around the same speed and 40-yard 40-yard dashes, but like Taysom Hill has explosion. I mean, his jumps were unreal. And I just kind of think you're putting this guy, you wrote about it on Monday, but you're kind of putting this guy in a box if you're like, well, could he be the Taysom Hill? Let's also remember Dave Canales has run a very, very steady 2 running back system here. So I don't know why he would just go to a third string quarterback to be active on game days when he, one, has not really favored having 3 guys on the 53 at quarterback, but also not disrupting the running back rotation when it's typically just been 2 guys. Trevor Etienne, who was a 4th round pick, barely saw touches for most of the year because they kept doing the Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard rotation. The year before that, it was very similar with how they were using Raheem Blackshear barely touched the ball. So I think that's important to note. I also think it's important to note that from a physique standpoint, you can look at like 6'2", 212 and say, well, they're like on paper, they're reasonably the same. No, they're not. Physical
And bro, that was the crazy thing, like, because Taysom Hill, I guess, at this point in his career is 6'2", 220, or maybe a little bit heavier than that. But you're right. Like, I remember Taysom Hill is just like physically imposing tight end. You know what I'm saying? And I like the cognitive dissonance between that was crazy.
Well, and what I think would have to happen too is he'd have to be on a weight program throughout his rookie year and he'd just be on the practice squad. So even if you wanted to put him in that role, it would take at least a year behind the scenes probably to make it work. And it took a while for Taysom to do the same thing. So I just think, see what the kid can do from a quarterback perspective. And just because he's a long, he is a good athlete, but Taysom at times was pretty accurate. He could run the ball. He could catch the ball. He was built. He could block. Like, there's so much to that. And I was exchanging text messages with a scout from another team, and he basically said, Taysom's 1 of 1. Like, he's such a rare athlete who can throw the ball and do all that stuff. The guy that, it's interesting, I just want to make sure that I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But Taylon Green, the 6th-round pick of the Browns, might be the best fit for that role of anybody in this draft class. He was a
Mhm.
6th-round pick. He's 6'6", 235, and he can run. Plus, he would be great on QB sneaks. I just think you're asking a lot of a guy who is an undrafted rookie, who's 25, who's been a quarterback his entire life. I mean, Taysom Hill was an older guy too, and was an like there are parallels there. I get it. I get why you want to make why folks want to make that comparison. I just think he'd be several years away from being able to do that job adequately off the jump.
And I don't know the ins and outs of Taysom Hill's career, but yeah, on Pro Football Reference, he didn't notch a snap in the NFL on an active roster until his season where he was 27 years old. So, yeah, I don't know like how much transforming happened after his BYU career was over, but um, everything you said is kind of what Haynes King also thinks of himself as well. He has his own plans too. I thought he actually handled that line of questioning really well. He essentially said, Whatever the team needs, I'm going to do, but I have my own confidence. I have my own plans. I am going to try to make it as a quarterback. That's what he had to do in college. That's really what he had to do in high school with his legendary high school coach of a father kind of forcing him to win over an entire team prior to taking the starting role at high level Texas high school football. And then that's what he had to do when he transferred from Texas A&M to Georgia Tech. He went over to Georgia Tech without any promise of NIL money, without any promise of a starting job. And he won the starting job and immediately became one of the most decorated players in Georgia Tech history. So he's done this before. He's been through it before. And it'll be interesting to see how training camp goes for him and how that quarterback room kind of gels, what Dave Canales wants to do with a player like Haynes King on his roster.
And what I would add to that too, when you're coming from Texas high school football and you were the son of a high school coach, there is an emotional maturity that typically happens where you're not much of a snowflake. You're not going to be weathered. Jalen Hurts, same situation, not going to be rattled. I think this is a really good opportunity for Haynes King if he can show some poise, like you said, if he can improve his accuracy from college, if he can learn under Dave Canales and Brad Isaac. I think mentally he's going to be sharp. It's just a matter of, can he physically put everything together? Can he be a guy that forces their hand? Because I don't think he makes the roster. We've talked about it before, his $250,000. You can wrap that up in the practice squad. He's got to force their hand. He's got to go out in the Hall of Fame game and throw for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. He needs to go out in consecutive preseason games, avoid turnovers, make big plays with his legs, and do that. Force it so that if they put him on waivers, there is a strong chance that a bad team tries to claim him.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way for him to get on the roster. Another 2 guys I just wanted to mention briefly, Lee Hunter, I thought was tremendous from a burst standpoint. Like, you could see it in individual drills. He's got quick hands, a nice first punch. Like, I really like that type of stuff. He is very physical. A guy that you might hear a lot of from the Processing Blue podcast this summer is Jasim Reed, who is a practice squad holdover, who is actually similarly built to Chris Brazzell. If you didn't know like what number they were, you might get them confused. But Brazzell and Jasim Reed both put on a show with the ball like out of their general area from a catch radius standpoint. They wanted him to work out during this rookie mini camp, and I thought he boosted his stock quite a bit. Being around this rookie class, having known the offense, knowing Rob Moore, I think he's a guy that, when we think about it, no one really knew who Bryson Tremaine was this time of year.
That's a good point.
We didn't really even see him in OTAs. So, I mean, I don't think it's out of the question that he could sneak up and maybe overtake somebody like Tremaine or like Jimmy Horn or whomever, if it's a true legitimate competition, especially if he can show some return chops, which I think there needs to be a return competition, especially from the punt return standpoint.
No, it's fascinating. Does he have any special teams acumen outside of being a return guy?
Not to my knowledge, but he does have the body type typically that you would want in a gunner.
Got it.
But then again, we also know what Caleb Evans and um, Dan Chisena and some of these Will Lee strikes me as a guy because of his background with press coverage that I think he actually could be a pretty good gunner down the
Mm,
road. I think Zakee Wheatley's size and speed, well, not great speed, but his size and length
yeah,
make
his
him
range.
kind of interesting.
Yeah,
I think they're going to have a lot of opportunity. I think the special teams group is going to improve quite vitally, actually,
yeah.
just because of the re-signings they've made, the guys that they've brought in. That's kind of interesting, but I do think punt returner really needs to be fit. Kick returner, like I didn't have a problem with ETN and kick returner. I also think Xavier Legette should get plenty of run there too. Um, and maybe even Jonathon Brooks. I don't know if they want to risk injury there, but he would make a lot of sense to me there as well. So we'll see how
Mm.
that goes, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out there while we are here.
Let's put a pin in the discussion about Jonathon Brooks. We'll come back to him in a second, but you mentioned cornerback, and and you actually talked to Devontae Smith, an undrafted rookie free agent who is going to try to make the squad this year. Someone that we're both pretty interested in and compelled by, mostly because of the position he plays.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, what about Devontae Smith stood out to you? Is there did you and you also asked Dave Canales about the nickel corner position. What were some overall takeaways that you got from your discussions with him?
Well, both days they were over on another side of the field, so it's kind of hard to keep track of him and Willie and Wheatley and all those guys. But what I will say in talking to him is he seems extremely self motivated. He is
Mm,
very serious. He feels slighted that he went undrafted, and he's using that as motivation in a healthy way, I think. We talked a little bit about his background with Bryce Young. They both played at Alabama when Bryce was kind of on his rise, and he remembers him being dominant during that period. Obviously, he won a Heisman. Um, but I think what's interesting about him is he talked about how zone heavy Alabama was his last year there before he transferred to Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was about 75 to 80% man coverage. So he's got a lot of experience in both. He's got experience playing on the outside, he's got playing nickel. Dave Canales brought up his versatility. I think he's a guy that makes a lot of sense because one, he's got a lot of special teams experience. Most of his Alabama career was made through special teams. And we talked about it. It's a very important thing to him. He's a very, very physical corner. And when you play the nickel position, you have to be a linebacker, a cornerback, a safety. Like you have to be basically every position in one, and you have to be very smart. He strikes me as a guy who is a student of the game, has a good football IQ. And I think there's going to be buzz around him. Talking to scouts around the league, that was one of the free agent signings that seemed to be the most notable for the Panthers. And so um, I think he's a really interesting player. I think the nickel corner spot's going to be wide open between Shaw Smith Wade and Corey Thornton, and even potentially him. And we'll see what happens. But at worst, I think if I were Caleb Evans and Robert Rochelle and those guys, I'd be kind of concerned that maybe two rookies make this roster over me if I'm them.
let's stay on this Corey Thornton discussion for a moment. Zach, can you pull up the quote that Dave Canales gave on Corey and on the nickel cornerback position as it stands right now? So I this is what Dave said on Saturday when you asked specifically about the nickel corner position. That position right there, we have Shaw Smith Wade. This is a quote. That position quote that position right there, we have Shaw Smith Wade coming back. We have Corey Thornton, who really won the job during the season last year and got an opportunity until he got hurt. That's some news right there. So there's a great competition already happening. Quote, we love to throw more possible guys at each position. Competition just breeds success. It breeds growth and development, and guys really start to push each other. So I'm excited to get those guys with the full group. Unquote. Mike, was it clear that Corey Thornton won the nickel corner position last year?
I thought in San Francisco, he was placed in that position, I didn't know that he won it.
Right.
I know there are people that are down on Shaw Smith Wade. I know he got a ton of hype from us during the summer. Got off to a pretty good start the first month. He is smaller than they prefer in that secondary. Corey definitely isn't.
Mhm.
Corey was a guy that when they signed him, the buzz internally was immense. Like you don't hear about that type of buzz from an undrafted rookie off the bat. Like there were some interesting guys with some interesting traits that we all kind of looked at and were like, oh, well, maybe he's got a shot. The safety room isn't that good, or the linebacker room isn't that good. Maybe these guys, but like Corey from the jump, I heard internally from several different people, this was a guy to watch. And we talked about Wheatley's lack of speed. That's why Corey basically dropped. And I think Corey's perfect for zone defense. I don't know that I think his best fit is nickel, but when
Mhm.
you want to get your three best corners on the field, you've got to figure out a way to get them. And I think that's also why I think Will Lee will be the first corner from the outside off the bench, because if Corey Thornton wins the nickel job, they're not going to put Shaw Smith Wade on the outside. It's also interesting the way that the Panthers use their nickel packages, because there's two different nickel packages. There's a base nickel package with a corner at the nickel position, and there's the big nickel position where they would use a safety in that role, or they would use a combination of different guys. And so if you can win the base job like Corey seems poised to do at this point, I mean, Dave just kind of straight up came out. I don't know if that was a challenge to Shaw or what, but he's normally not that forthcoming about battles. And I think, well, unless it's a kicker who's holding out, but because we all remember that one. But what I would say is, I think when we think about the nickel position, I think we have to be a little bit open minded, but we also have to remember, what do we always talk about? What do I always talk about, especially during the draft? These guys are all about size and length, like all about size and length. And if that's the case, I mean, Corey's got the the measurements, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. It just makes you wonder, like, if they are all about that, then why did you draft Shaw Smith Wade in the first place? Um, which is just something interesting to think about. I mean, Shaw. It's not like Shaw didn't make plays last year. He had a pick six against the Falcons. Like that he flashed at some points. And he seems to be a really good locker room guy as well. Like that's another thing the Panthers are really um, and they really value is players' ability to gel with the locker room culture guys. You hear that all the time too. So that whole positional battle will be interesting. Heading into OTAs, or I guess it's OTAs now, heading into the rest of the offseason program, we've talked about him ad nauseum. The Jonathon Brooks discussion is feels like it's the most important story heading into the rest of this offseason. You were on the golf course on Wednesday. You talked to a lot of former Panthers who had opinions on what Jonathon Brooks will do this year. Um, Brooks just has a ton of expectations on his shoulders.
Yeah,
What else? Like, what else can we say about him at this point?
well, I think there is a palpable optimism about him internally. I know externally they've been measured but optimistic. I think internally they are really excited about this kid. And he is a year removed from surgery, a little bit more. He's got the right attitude. I've said before, I think that this was a poor choice value wise when they made it. It was a poor, like, I think the thought process of his rookie year was flawed. Now, granted, they traded back and got a second round pick for the following year, and that led to Nick Scorton, and then so if you look at the entire second round of 2024 as a whole, I think it turned out to be positive, but they're in a spot where they're basically getting him on a 2-year contract, and if he can make the most of it and be a really successful 1B or even turn into a 1A in this rotation, they feel pretty good about salvaging that value. It's like finding $50 in your couch cushions. Like it is, I mean, if he doesn't work out or he re-injures himself in training camp, it's more of the same, right? But if he
Mhm.
goes out and he has an 800-yard, 6 touchdown season, that's a really decent number 2 running back right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And I think something that Jonathan Stewart said while we are on the golf course made me chuckle a little bit. He said, quote, he came in as a horse, but he's going to be a Clydesdale by the time he hits the field. And I'm excited for him. I'm excited for the Panthers. They have Chuba Hubbard there to be a good mentor brother. It seems like they're bonding. It seems like they're coming together, and it seems like they've become a little bit of one unit. And you kind of need that with your two dogs. Um, I think he's a guy that has a pretty good sounding board in Chuba Hubbard, but I also think he's got a really good support system. I think they've
Yeah.
handled this pretty well internally over the last year. I think their medical staff is an upgrade. I think we're seeing the way that they view injuries and how they handle injuries. And I think that's a benefit to him, but it's really a matter of him just going out on the field and making the most of it. I'm anxious to see how they kind of manage his snaps in the preseason, how much they kind of open him up to hard hits, because we won't know until he gets hit. Obviously, ACL injuries are ones that typically happen without contact, but he's looked fast. Even in December, I remember us being out like the last 2 or 3 weeks into the playoffs, and you'd watch him run half speed, and his half speed was more impressive than most guys' full speed. So, um, I'm interested to see how this goes. But I think like there are a few guys coming off of injury that we probably should talk about just in general.
Yeah. JT Sanders is one of them. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the receiving tight end who we, and I guess me, have talked a lot about this tight end room and how it needs a downfield threat at some point. Maybe JT Sanders can be that guy. He fractured his ankle at the end of last season, which ended his season. But according to Dave Canales, he is all set to go. And so that'll be interesting to see come OTAs. Also, Robert Hunt. Here's a guy, obviously the Panthers Pro Bowl right guard. He was out for most of the year last
Mm-hmm.
year. He was the first one to tell you at these exit interviews that we had after the Panthers lost in the playoffs that every game that he played last year, the Panthers lost. He only played in 3 games, obviously, and it's not a cause of him, but you know, like he was largely absent because of um an upper body injury of an upper body injury. What was it again? It was a bicep.
Bicep, yep.
Yeah. So like he's another guy that you got to kind of pay attention to come the rest of the offseason program. Damian Lewis is pretty tough, and he's kind of locked down that left guard spot. Plenty of center depth between free agent signing Luke Fortner, draft pick Sam Hecht, and reserve Nick Samak, your guy. And you obviously drafted an offensive tackle in the first round in Monroe Freeling. Um, is the Robert Hunt of all this kind of fascinating to you, or maybe not the Robert Hunt necessarily, but just in general the guard depth? Because we talked about Brady Christensen last week, still hasn't signed to the Panthers. What I mean, what are we doing? Like what is the plan at interior offensive line?
Well, I think as long as they don't have a Christensen or a proven guard other than Chandler Zavala in there, Luke Fortner should be considered the favorite to start at center in week one. Just or excuse me, not Fortner. Hecht should be considered the front runner in week one, just because Hecht and Samak, if they're on the 53, they're just centers. Like that's really what they are. And I think Fortner is a guy who you can lean on to be a backup left guard or right guard. I think where I'm at from the standpoint of the guard depth is I've seen a lot of Chandler Zavala, and I've seen a lot of inconsistency. I've seen a lot of injuries. My concern is what you brought up is Robert Hunt. So Robert Hunt played 3 games, including the playoffs. And in between that, it felt like everyone played right guard. I think you even got a couple of snaps.
I
So
did.
like, yeah, I mean, people don't know, but that was like in a blowout. Um, My concern is you don't have enough guys who can reliably play guard. City Charles is a veteran who's kind of bounced around and played inconsistently, and he'll be competition there. Ja'Tyre Carter, a guy that they cut after the preseason after he was almost unplayable against the Texans in the preseason, and that was like a big talking point. Or no, sorry, that was against the Browns, excuse me. And then like you've got some guys that you'd never heard of. They didn't sign any undrafted guys specifically to play guard. I believe Albert Reese and Isaiah Glass are both going to play tackle. Kenyon Green, we're recording this on Monday. They've yet to sign him. He's a guy who's battled a ton of injuries and didn't even play last year. So it's like the options are pretty limited there, whether they bring in Green or not. That could happen before this podcast publishes, but I wanted to acknowledge that. He looked relatively good in space, but he's been a right guard only for the most part. And I think a problem that happens is when a guy is used to starting and starting only at one position, it becomes harder to make them more flexible versatility wise on the offensive line. We saw that kind of with Austin Corbett, where Corbett kind of struggled at times when he was asked to move around on like a weekly basis from center to right guard, and et cetera, and left guard. And he played like all three interior positions. Brady Christensen's one of the few guys that has like been able to kind of handle that because he's been in flux basically since 2023. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if you feel optimistic about Christensen's long-term recovery and you feel like he can be ready by the preseason or maybe mid preseason, you should kind of take a stab at him because you want him rehabbing in your facility. You don't want him rehabbing on his own. And then you sign him in week 3 of the preseason and then he falls apart by week 3. Right. So I think they need to continue to monitor the waiver wire. They need to continue to monitor free agency and kind of look around before training camp because this guard depth is not good. It's not. It's just not. Like, I mean, you can't touch everything in the draft. You know, I don't know that any undrafted guy was going to be good enough. I mean, a few years ago, they brought in Nash Jensen, who made the week 1 roster.
Yeah.
He was out of the league within a year. So, like, I just think you have to look for some premium proven depth in the way that you did with Forsythe and Rasheed Walker and those guys. And I just, maybe they do think that Hecht or Sam could play guard. They're just not, especially for this type of blocking scheme. Like Canales clearly wants big dudes who are wide. That's what Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis are. They're both two different types of linemen, but they can get out in space and they're wide. Hecht and Samak can get out in space. They're just not wide dudes. They're built like Howard Mudd style centers. And Howard Mudd famously tutored Jeff Saturday, who led the way for guys like Khalil and Kelsey and that ilk to be mainstays in the NFL. And I don't know. I don't see them playing guard. I also don't think it'd be great for their development. So we'll see.
History of the center with Mike Kaye. That was good stuff. Anything else before we get on out of here, Mike? I think we hit on everything that we wanted to address right after rookie minicamp. Again, only so much you can glean at this point in the year, but still a lot of optimism.
Yeah, I mean, the schedule is coming out on Thursday, so we'll have all the coverage of that on Thursday. Next week, we'll kind of get into the schedule, the nitty-gritty of it all. Hopefully, we can add some perspective on some upcoming matchups. I'm not a huge strength of schedule guy. I think it kind of just matters what's in front of you that week. As we saw last year, Panthers pulling off upsets on the Rams, and they probably should have won that 49ers game.
Packers, yep.
Yeah, the Packers game. Like, so we'll take a look at it. Obviously, we're not going to put anything in pen or marker, but I think it'll be interesting to see how this schedule shakes up for them. Will they open at home for the first time in what feels like forever? Will they open up against an NFC South opponent? I'll tell you this. The game that I want to see week 1 is at Bank of America Stadium against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Frequently, they have waited later in the year to play the Buccaneers. And I just think there is a sense of rivalry right now that there had, like, typically you hear a lot about the Saints and typically you hear a lot about the Falcons because they play so early in the year. I'd really like to see Baker Mayfield, Bryce Young, and Canales versus Bowles, and see like kind of what comes out of that. I just think that'd be like a really interesting week one matchup that we haven't really seen of late. I like a division matchup early on in the year, like in week one, especially because you finish against a division opponent in week 18. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to see.
It is interesting that there's a lot of connective tissue and fuel for a rivalry between those two
Right.
franchises. That's pretty sick. That'd be nice if that's how they start the year. All right, Mike, here we go. Thanks as always for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach Dennis. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all of your Panthers needs. Mike, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
That's a wrap, Zach.